If I could have your attention, please. At this time, we're going to begin the funeral in our chapel for Mr. Nathan Jim Meyerhoff. As we begin the service, I would ask if any of you may have a cell phone or any other noise-making device, please turn it off at this time. Officiating the service here today is Rabbi Karen Kadar from Congregation B'nai Jehoshua Beth Elohim in Deerfield, and the rabbi will begin the service assisting the family in the ancient tradition of Kriya. If I could ask the family members wearing ribbons to stand together at this time.
Sitting here off to the side, watching you greet all the people that have walked in, there was almost a sense of, dare I say, even joy in the room. People so happy to see you, and yet so sad to see you under these circumstances. People happy to be together, happy to celebrate, and yet remembering so many things. And that kind of emotion that you can feel in a room carries us through these moments. It really matters that you are here. And the family knows that there are many places that you could be or should have been or wanted to be, and yet your presence here is everything. People don't forget who passes through. And it's not just in this moment, but it's in the days that follow, because it is our faith and our community and our friends that carry us through these moments. We turn to the Psalms. Esa inai el harim me'ayin yavo ezri. I lift my eyes to the mountains. What is the source of my help? My help will come from God, who is the maker of heaven and earth. God will not let your foot give way. Your protector will not slumber. See, the protector of Israel neither slumbers nor sleeps. God is your guardian, your protection at your right hand. The 23rd Psalm together. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He guideth me in straight paths for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou hast anointed my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. The end of that psalm is so incredibly poignant. My cup runneth over. Your life filled with so much blessing. And though we are in sadness now and sit in the valley of the shadows, what pursues us, according to this psalm, is not this sadness, but goodness and love, which will follow you all the days of your life. In the rising of the sun and its going down, we will remember him. In the blowing of the wind and the chill of winter, we will remember him. In the opening of buds and the rebirth of spring, we will remember him. In the rustling of leaves and in the beauty of autumn, we will remember him. in the beginning of the year, and when it ends, we will remember him. And when you are weary and in need of strength, you will remember him. When you are lost and sick at heart, you will remember him. When you have joys you yearn to share, you will remember him. As long as we live, he too shall live, always in our hearts, in our memories, in our life. He will be remembered. We say with the book of Job, Adonai natan v'Adonai lekach yehi shem Adonai mevarach, which means God has given, God has taken away. Blessed be the name of God. We're an ancient people and well acquainted with grief and the valley of shadows. Death and sorrow are not strangers to us, but one thing we have learned throughout our tradition is that a good name endures beyond the grave. And he had a good name. So now we say with Job, Adonai natan, God, you've given us a loved one who we will always remember. For all that is good and enduring in his life, we offer the deepest thanks of our hearts. Adonai lekach, and God, you have taken him away. So let us find the strength to turn our hearts into an altar of faith and goodness. Yehi Shem Adonai Mevarach. Blessed be the name of God now and forever. It does great honor when loved ones rise to offer a few memories. Jimmy's children will come up and offer their recollections, first Amy, then Jill, then Peter. And then Jenna and Emma will come, and at that time I'll ask all the grandchildren to surround them as they talk. First, Amy.
My dad asked who was going to come to my funeral. Well, so for those of you here and who are seeing this virtually, it warms us, and it would delight him. So, not just a few words, more than a few words. What is in a name? Today we are honoring the life of my dad, Nathan Elson Meyerhoff. Who, you may be asking? I thought his name was Jim. I guarantee my dad was the first and last baby boy named Nathan to end up being called Jimmy. I think it's a story worth telling because who we are begins with our name, doesn't it? My dad was named for his maternal grandfather, Nathan Elson, who passed away in the months before he was born. As the story is told, my great-grandmother, who lived with them, was too grief-stricken to hear her husband's name spoken. So, to avoid this, they called him Brother. Yes, you heard me right. Brother, as in a Jewish Brother Meyerhoff. For years, this was his name. That is, until Brother went to kindergarten and saw there were a bunch of very cool Jimmies in his class. Brother did not sound so great, so he quickly leapt at the opportunity to change it. He came home, announced, "I'm Jimmy now." Apparently no one cared, so Jimmy it was. Like his name, my dad's final days were also something he would have chosen, if that were such a thing. He was merely fatigued for several months, but the most painful symptom he had until the day he died was his loss of appetite. Now that truly pained him. His final couple of months were spent sitting in his brown recliner, hosting everyone he loved around the clock. He knew his time was limited, but he was also perplexed because he felt so great. Now that's the way to go. Now it's time to talk about the dash. Ed has been come to know from a poem by Linda Ellis. It refers to the time between the date of birth and the date of death, the dash that is etched on a headstone. I think we can all agree on this. The dash is the true mark of a life. I think last week my dad had the best day of his life, and I wasn't even there. It was a couple of Sundays ago, and he was settled in that chair I mentioned to watch the Bears game. One by one, his local grandchildren and great-granddaughter appeared out of the blue to huddle around him and just hang out. The last couple of weeks, he could not stop talking about that perfect day. I tried hard not to take it personally, that it could be perfect without me. But really, the very best part was that every one of them truly wanted to be there with their Jimpa. By the way, another name he picked for himself, Jimpa. Is that not the greatest name for a grandfather ever? My dad had a way of making every single person he came across feel important. We have a running joke in our family that he had one smart child, one funny child, and one beautiful child, but he was not telling us which was which. For each of us, we each secretly knew that we were his favorite. And truly, we were all right. I imagine for those of you who happen to have known my dad personally, you probably also secretly feel like you might have been his favorite. What a gift. My dad grew up in a literal white picket house on Lincoln Avenue in Highland Park, attending both Ravinia School and Highland Park High School. How many kids these days can say they are third generation at their grade school and high school? My kids are just that. They walked through the same exact doors of Ravinia School that my dad did in 1939. Can you imagine going to the very same building for kindergarten that your grandfather and uncle went to? Not only that, but the same high school that your parents and grandparent went to. Crazy, but true. My dad really loved my mom. They had a marriage that truly worked. He said to me last week, "I feel so lucky I picked the right woman." And truly, he did. My parents are two of the brightest people I know, and they were true equals. They both loved to tell their meet story. She was an East Coast girl from Lowell. He was Lowell, Massachusetts, for those of you who don't know, and he was a boy from Highland Park. She was at Brandeis, and he was at Williams College. Like I said, pretty smart parents. The story goes, she was at Williams for a winter weekend with another guy when her date asked my dad to keep her company while he was working. My dad thought she was, and I quote, the cutest thing I had ever seen. And apparently the bro code did not stop him from getting the girl. It has been a true joy to be a child of marriage, so full of love, brains, mutual respect, and more than anything, laughter. My dad had some insights in these last weeks over how life had unfolded for him. He grew up in a different age, perhaps one where parent-child relationships could be a tad more formal. Somehow, despite his own experience, he himself was a parent full of warmth, affection, and fun. We leapt with excitement when he walked through the door after work with a whistled, "Yoo-hoo, anybody home?" After dinner, there was the requisite game of quarters. He would have us sit on the top step with him standing below us with a quarter hidden in one of his hands behind his back. We had to pick the right one to move down a step. I only just learned that the game was rigged. He fessed up that he changed hands to always keep it even. The nerve. To me, my dad was the one who came home from work and played catch with his daughter. Not wimpy catch, real glove, real hardball, catches that stung. Once I learned how to throw, there was lots and lots of hot box before dinner. Some of you may know this as running bases. It was the same with football. He taught me how to place my fingers on the laces for a proper spiral. At the time, it didn't feel unusual, but when I got older and was the only girl I knew who could throw a ball and knew the rules to all sports, it became clear that his parenting style was pretty special. Really, It was his assumption that I could do anything, learn anything, that more than anything else probably shaped the course of my entire life. I just thought of something else that I'm adding, impromptu. He taught me multiplication tables. I remember the excruciating feeling of Mr. Holcomb putting a record on in 6th grade that counted out these problems, and if you couldn't catch up, you were doomed. And I was a decent student, so that was not fun for me. He said, "We got this." And for weeks, he had me write out flashcards and taught me the multiplication tables. I think I probably stretched it out a week or two just to have private father-daughter time. But I think you can kind of remember that mastery of multiplication tables is sort of an empowering thing. And I became a CPA. So take that for what it's worth. A diehard Cubs fan, he also shared that with me. I couldn't wait to sit next to him at Wrigley Field with my chubby little pencil, eagerly keeping the box score he taught me. One game, we left early to beat the traffic. We were already at the car, only to hear a late rally by the Cubs. He actually turned around and rushed me back to our seats to see the end of the game. We laughed the whole way at how stupid we had been to leave in the first place. Not many dads would enthusiastically turn around after getting all the way to the car. Also, as a shareholder of the pre-Ricketts Cubs, he also took me to the annual shareholders meetings, proudly introducing me to the players and other bigwigs. I felt so important. On another note, thank God they won the World Series before he died. In 1985, I was offered a job in LA. I didn't know a soul there and was a little apprehensive to take it. I distinctly remember where I was sitting on the phone with my dad, pondering what seemed a very weighty decision. He simply said, "You know, Damers," as in Amers Damers, "you can always come back if you don't like it." That was a revelation to me. Truly. It feels silly saying that now, especially because I actually did come back a couple of years later. But at the time, what it felt like was freedom. I have referred back to that moment many times in my life and found myself using a version of it to others too. Because of him, I tried something hard and scary, and I knew I always had a safe place to come back to if I needed it. Dad, thank you for giving me wings. He was my champion, always proud of me. With the wisdom of age and experience, I now see how vital it is to have someone think you are great. The thing is, my dad thought everyone was great, and no one cared that we weren't the only one basking in his pride. For more family history, my dad's dad, Irving Meyerhoff, was a true naturalist, and his name is etched on the plaque in front of the preserved Stupi Cabin in Highland Park, one of the first residences in the area. He was also vitally responsible for the preservation of the area now known as the Berkeley Prairie. I say all this just to give you a sense of the incredible legacy that has been passed on to us through my dad and his family. There is something about this that has given me a truly solid foundation. I don't think I ever truly appreciated it until now. My mom and I were chatting this week about what would be a good way to honor who my dad was, with any memorial charitable contributions that might come his way. She suggested Lake County's Nuestro Center. My mom, of course, as always, hit the nail on the head. For those of you who don't know, my dad found his true calling late in life. After retiring from trading, he began community volunteering. My brother is going to do justice to this part of my dad's life, and you will see why we have picked this charity for him. I hope one thing you can take away from this today, perhaps another legacy my dad can have, is to remind us to say everything we want to say to someone we love when you have the chance. We had the luxury of time these past weeks, but we all know that is not always the case. The last couple of months, we've spent hours talking, reminiscing, laughing, and crying, mostly crying, but not out of sadness. He would keep reminding us as the tears flowed that he was crying out of happiness. And truly, he was. He shared so many stories about his youth and life that I now truly feel like I got to know him not just as father, but as a man. I hope with our words today, you also will know the dash of my dad's life. Lastly, there's one thing about him that I'm saying about him here, or will say in the future, that I didn't say to him directly. In fact, a couple days ago when he was in a deep sleep, I read him this very eulogy. It was an incredibly peaceful way to say goodbye to someone. He has asked each of us repeatedly over the past weeks if he was a good father, a good man. He wasn't looking for a compliment. He was looking for the truth. Such an easy answer that was. Dad, you were not just a good father, a good man. You were the best.
Thanks, Ames. My dad was terrible at giving wedding speeches and events and b'nai mitzvahs. He couldn't make it through the first 10 seconds without crying. It's the only thing about my dad that I didn't want to be like, but I can't help it. So bear with me. Would you believe? My dad's passing Sunday morning was a peaceful and fitting finale to a gorgeous life. As he was nearing the end, we four gathered close to him and held on. I'd put an old radio show on in the background, a nostalgic, old-timey show Dad used to love. At the moment he stopped breathing, a classic, sappy folk song came on, Gene Autry's Red River Valley, about saying goodbye to someone you love. He would have known the lyrics and hammed it up. We asked Dad, "Dad, are you gone?" We concurred that he was gone. And just when you call the game, he let out one big final breath with perfect comic timing as if to say, "Not so fast." Like a sitcom. The crescendo of that corny song and his last parting shot gave us a beautiful laugh-cry moment, a real gift. He was totally there, saying goodbye in his way, giving that last zinger, as he was famous for. And now, I'm no longer afraid to die. Thank you, Dad. He will truly live on in each of us. His beautiful imprint is eternal. Sam said recently that Jimpa will always influence his behavior, and the fact that he will be forever influence his behavior makes him alive in those moments. So true. Dad, Jimbo, family man, loved music, movies, theater, TV, reading, history, swearing, teaching, great food, and Diet Coke. He loved my mom, the only girl he ever loved. Their marriage was a full one. They loved each other's company. They saw the world, took us on trips, cooked, made a funny, mod, cozy home, had great friends. Ravinia picnics, barbecues, lobster parties, and they bickered with the best. Recently, I sat with Dad and his lifelong friend. They were laughing about their square college days. And I don't care what you say, Elliott Lyons, you guys were so cool. You went to jazz clubs in New York. As Jimpa, he was crazy about his grandkids and new great-granddaughter. He marveled in all of their achievements, individuality, cuteness, silliness. His enjoyment and pride in them was genuine. There wasn't a phony bone in my dad's body. He was all about fun, great hugs, affection, patience, generosity, and the occasional pop quiz. He went to every school play, game, graduation, dance show, concert, event. Wow, he would say, that was great. He taught the kids the importance of an inside joke. He taught them the sideways sarcastic look. Once, for a big surprise at our holiday party, he secretly hired a magic show for us in the living room. It was a gas. We still don't know how the magician pulled a watermelon out of Judy TK's head. He was all about trivia and games, and Jim would always have a really important prize for the winners and then an important prize for the not winners. Growing up, I remember fun. I remember thinking my dad with his sideburns was the coolest guy I knew. I remember Saturday afternoons, my dad, while fixing my bike, would have his transistor radio tuned into the game on WGN or Chuck Shaden's Those Were the Days. I remember him taking us to the movies, Fantasia, Blazing Saddles, The Sting. Put the candle back. As a little girl, he took me to see a Blackhawks game once, just me. And when he was having a hard time circling around trying to find a parking spot, I kept fooling him and saying, "There's a spot! There's a spot! Kidding!" He made me feel like a comedian. I remember summer days sitting in the grass in a circle with neighborhood kids with Dad playing Woody Guthrie on the banjo. I remember him taking me to see Brahms inside the pavilion at Ravinia. It was my first concert. I looked over at my dad, and his eyes were closed, and a tear was streaming down his cheek. That's how much he loved music, and so I loved music too. I started making little things out of clay when I was very little. I looked forward to showing him. "Marvelous," he would say. "Neato!" And I believed him. He said, "You're a real artist." And I believed him. My dad had a way of seeing the strengths and beauty in each of us kids and encouraging us to be our true selves. With my dad, I remember comfort. Carrying me after a very bad, I was injured in my foot in a bicycle accident, carrying me to see the movie Jungle Book. "You're a trooper," he said. I loved that word. I felt brave, like a soldier. I remember weekend trips to Ross Discount with an Egg McMuffin on the way. Knowing I was an animal lover, he humanely relocated a mouse he captured in the basement. I remember once he came home from work and I was not feeling good. I curled up on his lap and he said, "Jill Beans, are you going to throw up?" "No." "Are you sure?" "No." Hoo-ah, all over his belly. He put gentleness and humor into his comfort without making me feel bad. I remember waking up in the middle of the night, hearing something outside that sounded like screaming alien babies. I was paralyzed with fear. He came into my room, surveyed the situation, and concluded that it was just some animals playing, and let's just say it wasn't a tie. People would sometimes rib my dad about his belly. To me, it wasn't a big belly. It was a pillow. "Dad, love you so much. Thanks for propping me up, for being such a beautiful softie, for all of the moral support, and for giving us the time of our lives."
Thank you for coming. I'm just going to tell a couple stories about Dad. They're small stories, but I hope they paint a big picture. So a little context for the first story. When I was little, on Saturday morning, my dad would do errands. He would go to the post office, the bank, and the hardware store, and he would always ask if I wanted to come. And sometimes I would stay home and watch cartoons, and he would always bring me back breakfast from McDonald's. But usually I did want to go, because I loved being with my dad. He made everything fun, and you just liked being with him. He was always inventing games. One of my favorites was a game called Pilot to Co-Pilot. So he would sit in the driver's seat, and I would sit in the passenger seat, and he would say, "Pilot to Co-Pilot, engage the activator knob to 4," and I would turn the radio knob to 4, and I would say, "Co-Pilot to Pilot, roger that." That game is awesome. You should play it. So that's what those Saturday mornings were like. So story number 1, on one of those mornings, it must have been about 5, and we were driving, and I said, "Dad, what's a warship?" wow, did he love getting that question. Because Dad knew a lot about military history, and especially World War II. He served in the Army. He was a radio operator and a code breaker. Fortunately, he served during peacetime, but he was very interested in World War II, and he knew all about it. He read books, and he watched movies. He really knew this stuff. So he starts telling me about navies and admirals and battleships and carriers and destroyers, and he goes on and on. And finally he said, so what made you ask that? And I said, well, I saw a sign back there, and it said, House of Worship. We just had such a good time together, and I know so many of you had a great time with him also. He was just so easy and fun to be with. A lot of our connection came through sports, especially the Cubs. Dad was at Wrigley Field in 1945 for the World Series. And he and I were at Wrigley Field in 2016 when the Cubs beat the Dodgers to go to the World Series. I'm pretty sure he was the only one in that stadium who had been there in 1945. Isn't that a thing? And we were together 2 weeks later when the Cubs did win the World Series. For the record, usually we say somebody was a lifelong Cubs fan. He actually wasn't. When he was growing up, he was a fan of the Cardinals and Stan Musial. Fortunately, he got that straightened out before long. So we watched a ton of sports, and we would be talking and texting during games. And the thing about my dad was he was always optimistic. Whatever your thing was, your project, he was optimistic with you. So if I called and the Bears were down 3 touchdowns, he would pick up the phone and say, we're going to win this game. That was just a spirit that he brought to everything that he did in life. And we played sports together too. He was a good athlete. Jim was a good athlete. We played catch in the backyard 1,000 times. I don't remember him saying no. We played golf. He was a really good golfer. He played in the Pro-Am of the Western Open multiple times. A few years ago, I got a hole-in-one, and right there on the course, I picked up the phone and I called him. So I mentioned that my dad had a lifelong interest in World War II, and a few weeks ago I was with him, and we were talking out of the blue. He says, you know, the thing that really comes through in everything that I've read about the war, he said, in battle, you're not fighting for your country or freedom or democracy. He said, those guys are fighting for each other, for their buddies. You're fighting for the guy next to you. And that's what I want to turn to now, what my dad did for other people. That's what he was about. Story number 2. My dad was walking through the train station one day in Chicago on his way to work. And a young man who had a clear cognitive disability comes toward him. And this young man extended his hand and he said, hello, sir, my name is Jeffrey. And my dad, I'm certain, without hesitation, shook his hand and said, hi, Jeffrey, my name is Jim. It's nice to meet you. And as this man turned to go on his way, he said out loud to himself, he said, I did it without closing my eyes. So why am I sharing that story? Because most people would have seen Jeffrey coming and turned away. Ignored him, pretended he didn't exist. But my dad's instinct was to welcome him and accept him and accept that handshake and greet him as a person. And in doing that, he created a moment of learning and achievement for that man. He recognized Jeffrey's humanity and dignity. And that was at the core of my dad's connection with other people. He cared about you as a person. You always felt seen with my dad. So we've said almost nothing today about Jim's work. He was a stockbroker. He was a member of the Chicago Stock Exchange and the CBOE. But the reason we're not talking about it is that being a trader was not at all who he was. that was not in his soul. What he actually was, and I think we all only came to realize this late in life, was a teacher. Jim Meyerhoff was a teacher. In the 60s, he volunteered at Great Lakes Naval Base, and he was teaching sailors who were in prison in the brig. And when he moved off the trading floor in the 90s, he started training and mentoring new members of the stock exchange. But it was when he retired that he really found that calling. He volunteered at our alma mater, Highland Park High School, a program called Grand Times. And on the wall of his office at home were many, many cards and letters from the students who he had helped to tutor and mentor. He worked with immigrants in Highwood, helping them learn how to get settled in American society. He worked with elementary school students through the Nuestro Center on math and language arts. And we know from those letters on the wall and from talking to the teachers who supervised him that those people, young and old, they really liked my dad. They appreciated what he was doing, and they knew that he liked and respected them. And he understood them and what they needed, and this is why I say that he had the soul of a teacher. He told me a few weeks ago that when he volunteered at Great Lakes, working with those sailors in prison, he was supposed to be teaching them current events. But he said they told him what they really wanted was to learn basic math so they could get jobs when they got out. And so he just forgot about the current events and he taught them math. And when he was working with the elementary school students, I hope nobody from Nuestro is here because I don't want to get my dad in trouble. But he was supposed to be teaching them math, and he said sometimes what they just needed was somebody to talk to and goof around with. And so I did that, he said. And that's what a great teacher does. They listen to their students, they hear them, they respect them, and they give them what they need. And that's what we all experienced with my dad. That feeling of connection, that feeling of being seen and understood. It was important to my dad that we always remember the Holocaust, and not only the Jews who were killed, but also those who at great risk tried to save them and did save them. And so he served as president of an organization called Avenue of the Righteous, which honors those brave men and women and tells their stories. And in Dad's honor, let us remember them today. He was a kind and loving grandson, son, brother to Jean and Mitzi, husband to Helen, uncle, cousin, father-in-law, brother-in-law, grandfather, great-grandfather, and friend. And to Amy and Jill and me, he was dad. My favorite book growing up, one that I read over and over again, was I Now Realize, the story of a boy who loved his dad. And so I will close today with the last lines of that book, and they read, because what I'm trying to tell you, what I've been trying so hard to tell you all along, is that simply that my father, without the slightest doubt, was the most marvelous and exciting father any boy ever had. Thank you, Dad. We miss you, we love you, and we will always tell stories about you.
Grandkids, come up. So, as Amy mentioned, he announced the name Jimpa for himself, and it was perfect, right? Natural. It was the obvious choice for a grandpa name. It just made sense. And I think that can also be said about the way he took on his role as a grandfather. He just made sense as a grandpa. It was obvious and natural the way his spirit and personality made him the perfect grandpa. And we were so lucky to have him as our Jimpa. One glance around his office room with the grandkid pictures and saved middle school theater programs, he even saved a little Post-it note that I had doodled on. And I know he felt lucky to be our grandpa too. And that was our relationship, just so much gratitude and love, and especially playfulness. My favorite game I'd play with him was that at every family gathering, he would text me something like, "Raise your right arm." I would, and then we would laugh together that nobody had any clue what we were doing or what we were laughing about. I checked my texts. We started doing that game in 2012 with Raise Your Right Arm, and our last one just a few weeks ago had escalated to, "When I see you tonight, say pomegranate doodah." He had so many fun games and ways of connecting with each of us. When we were kids, he'd tell us to study the words on the ketchup bottle at restaurants for 10 seconds before he'd quiz us on what it looks like. And now that we're older, we're adults, he still played the study the menu game with us. But also, now he would excitedly ask us about our jobs and our studies and always reply with, "Oh, isn't that just neat?" He loved watching us grow and become adults, and he made it so clear how proud he is of us. When I remember him, I'll think of him starting to cry last Passover as he just spoke of his gratitude to be together as a family. When I remember him, I'll think of him waking me up the morning Noah was born. When I remember him, I'll think of how much fun we had right up until the very end, just going over and chatting over dinner. Being a grandfather was the perfect role for him, such an easy fit. And just like Jimpa was the perfect grandpa name, he was the perfect grandpa.
Jimpa was the most calming presence in a crowded room. If I felt overwhelmed at a party, I would just walk next to Jimpa and get a squeeze of the hand. I would instantly feel more relaxed, no matter what was going on. It was never anything he said. It was just that I could be silent next to him, have my hand held, and be comforted, even at 30. I thought of Jimpa as a quiet force for good. He didn't always say what he thought was right. He just did it, and he loved it. He volunteered. He accepted people as they were, with only curiosity and never judgment. I became Orthodox when I was 22, and I will never know if he disagreed with me, because he always made me feel that I was allowed to choose his path for myself. He asked questions and teased and kept loving me the exact same as he did when I was 7. Only writing this now am I realizing I don't really know what he thought about it, just that I always felt like myself with him. When I think of Jimpa, I think of a hug, warm, comforting, easy. I feel right now a great sense of loss. The immense sadness that I feel tells me just how big of a presence Jimpa was in my life. I will miss watching him make my brothers laugh. I'll miss him asking if this empty can of soda is heavier than usual. I'll miss stealing glimpses of him, giving my mother a squeeze, Jill a loving look, or the great look of pride that beamed from him towards Peter. My mother, his fearless, independent, wise, kindred neighbors. Jill, his resilient, creative, spunky, observant, history buff Jill. And his Peter, sensitive, brilliant, interesting, intellectually honest, attentive Peter. I'll miss watching his Helen fuss about him telling her not to fuss, her keep fussing, and then Jimpa secretly looking relaxed because he knew you always just took care of him. Grandma Helen, you were such a source of inspiration and pride for my Jimpa. He was so proud of who you are and what you've accomplished. He loved telling stories about you and your adventures together. I believe you gave him great bravery and confidence in his life. Together, you built a life of strong values, intellectual pursuit, and a great appreciation of humanity. You gave that to your children and your children's children. We are all different, but from both of you, we all got goodness,
We all feel like we had the most unique, special connection with Jimpa because we each truly did. He formed connections through curiosity, affection, humor, warmth. Through Jimpa, I learned how to be brave with my emotions. He was very sentimental later in life, and he was never ashamed to cry. To be so real and connected in such a world, he kept me grounded and reminded me what's important. In honor of Jimpa, of how he lived his life, as you've known or learned today, I'd like to share a quick idea for all of us. There's a particular Jewish text called Pirkei Avos, Ethics of Our Fathers. In it, we learn all matters of morality and ethics. One idea, which many of you probably learned at some point, comes originally from Pirkei Avos. Do not judge your fellow until you've stood in his place. If you see someone succumb to a terrible choice and end up doing something wrong, do not judge him until you yourself were in the exact same situation and overcame it. Now, even then, have we stood in his place? Did we go through his childhood, her adversity? Can we really know what it's like to be someone else with their dreams and their struggles and then face their challenges under the exact same circumstances? Is it ever truly possible to stand in someone's place? In honor of my Jimpa, who did this so easily, let's consider this idea when we have an easy opportunity to judge someone and consider taking a step back and reminding ourselves we don't really know what it's like to be that person. Let's give them the benefit of the doubt, because that's just something Jimpa did in his soul. I'm a better person because of Jimpa. How many people can say they've bettered others through love, kindness, acceptance, and goodness? My Jimpa can.
Helen, look what the two of you created. Not only a tribe, and it isn't quite a tribe, and thank God he saw that next generation born, but a tribe of people who are so deeply, deeply understanding of who the two of you are. When we talked yesterday, we were dividing up who was going to say what, and we were trying to make sure that I wouldn't repeat anything, and I promised that I wouldn't unless it was to be emphasized, and they told you the meat story. But I also believe that there may have been the circumstances where the two of you met, but somehow destinies collided and souls chattered to one another. And from that very unlikely meeting, the two of you knew that greatness of spirit and character, and that generations could be born of the two of you together. And so you did. You were born together, and you came together, and you have known each other forever. Both of you have families that go back to the turn of the last century. I was fascinated. I could have sat there forever listening to your family histories. Every family has a story to tell for sure. And he definitely has a story to tell, and those of you who knew Jean and Mitzi should tell those stories over and over again. Those of you who knew his parents should tell their stories. They want to hear them. Not every story in life is a story of triumph and greatness and beauty, but every story is our story. And through you and your marriage together, you brought together this great tribe. And Jill, you know, the family called you the archivist, the one who's going to put it all together. And I'd love to see how that turns out. It's incredible that your children knew who you were, knew who he was. And to listen to children talk about that relationship is really extraordinary. A relationship of equals, one who supported one another. They actually even called him a feminist, though I doubt he would have called himself a feminist, because he totally delighted, Helen, in your life and your life work, helping women in their second career, working for Planned Parenthood, looking at his daughters as people, not putting them in pigeonholes. You had a husband, you had a father who completely recognized who you were. And you know, there always is in those stories of the siblings of who was the favorite. And I gotta tell you, you all really were the favorite. That as we talked about yesterday, that the heart has an infinite capacity to love if you don't make it choose. And neither of you made the choice, or he didn't make the choice. He could look at each and every one of you and delight in your sensitivity. You said it so beautifully, connecting what was true about each of his children. And I just have to mention that when I asked specifically about, well, tell me about the relationship with Peter and Jim, then the whole room just gave a sigh of knowing that he, being the only son in his family, having an only son in his new family, and how redemption and beauty came out of that. He was your cheerleader. He was your role model. He saw what was good in you, even at those moments that you couldn't see. And that makes all the difference in the world. I loved how you talked about laughter and his sense of humor, and how you talked again about how his kindness to all peoples brought him up and taught you to be kind to all people. A man with high integrity, authentic and humble, and saw truth for what truth would be. A man who didn't have an artificial bone in his body, that was warm and had good friendship and would tell these stories over and over again. Every now and then, there is great healing by the bedside of somebody who's dying. And when he looked upon his children and his grandchildren, he dug into places and wanted to understand and to know. He was looking at his life and at his losses, and he was seeing the beauty and the good of it all, and trying to put those pieces together, and somehow you all became a reflection of that light, of what was good and enduring of life. And through the children and the grandchildren, there was great healing as you reflected his beauty back. I was listening to Red River Valley. I kind of wanted to be there with you. So I was putting these words together, knowing that half of them I wouldn't say because that you would go ahead and say. I went and I listened to it, and then I looked up the lyrics, and as he was taking his last breath, it was like you were in a musical. Come sit by my side if you love me. Do not hasten to bid me adieu. But remember the Red River Valley, which you will always remember, and the one that has loved you so true. He was an incredible husband and father and brother. He made you feel important, an uncle. He just was quite a human being. And every now and then I'm able to say this, and I'm so grateful I'm able to say it now, and you mentioned it a little bit, Peter, that really the difference in this life is not what you've done for a living, whether you became rich or famous. Really, and he knew this to the core, the only difference between people in this life are those who have had love and those who haven't. And what an incredible gift that he was able to create this tribe, along with Helen, based on the reality of love and loyalty and kindness. May his memory be for a blessing. Please rise. El Malei Rachamim, Shochem Baromim, מצא מנוחה נכונה תחת כנפי השכינה עם קדושים הטהורים כזוהר הרקיע מזהירים את נשמת ג'ם שהלך לעולמו. בעל הרחמים יסתירה בסתר כנפיו לעולמים ויצור בצור החיים את נשמתו, אדוני הוא נחלתו, תנוח בשלום על משכבו ונאמר אמן. Compassionate God, eternal spirit of the universe, grant perfect rest in your sheltering presence to Jim. He has entered eternity. O God of mercy, let him find refuge in your eternal presence. Let his soul be bound up in the bond of everlasting life. God is his inheritance. May he rest in peace, to which we all say, Amen. Please be seated.
This concludes the service here in our chapel. The interment will take place immediately at the family's plots at Memorial Park Cemetery, 9900 Grosse Pointe Road here in Skokie. Following the interment, the family will be sitting Shiva today from 4 p.m. until 9 p.m. at the Bazelon residence, 839 Mosley Road in Highland Park. That information's on the inside portion of the funeral service folder. The notations that do not appear are there will be masks available but not required at the house, but the family does ask that you not attend the Shiva in person if you have not been fully vaccinated. For those of you going with the family in procession to the cemetery today, the procession will be forming in our parking lot. Please make sure you obtain an orange funeral safety sticker. That sticker should be placed in the front passenger side of your windshield. We would also ask that you please have your bright headlights and flashing hazard lights on at all times. For an additional measure of safety, our staff will be placing magnetic flags on the tops of the vehicles throughout the procession. As we drive in procession today, please drive as close as safety permits to the vehicle in front of you at all times. We want to avoid having any large spaces or large gaps in the procession, particularly as we pass through the intersections. Please note that the family has asked that donations for Mr. Meyerhoff be made to the Niestro Center. That information is available. For those of you watching online, that information is available on the website you are currently on. The following individuals have been selected to act as pallbearers. As I call your name, if you'd please come to the front of the chapel. Gary Bazelon, Danny Bazelon, Johnny Bazelon, Sam McNearland, Adam Meyerhoff, Noah Meyerhoff, and Adam McKenna, and as honorary pallbearer, Elliot Lyon. If I could ask everyone to please rise as the deceased and his family and rabbi are escorted from the chapel. Thank you. Ask everyone to please go directly to your cars. The family is not greeting any longer at the